welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really getting into it, looking at a time of, well, intense change and conflict, all thanks to the amazing sources you've shared with us. We're unpacking the whole story around Sultan Murad II and the huge Battle of Varna.
That's right. And our goal today really is to go beyond just dates and names. We want to dig into the insights from your sources, the big decisions, the turning points, even the dramatic moments that led up to this really major battle in the 1400s.
Yeah, and like you said, based on these sources, it's definitely not just a dry history lesson. We're talking unexpected politics, really deep personal grief, promises just completely broken. And I mean, the stakes couldn't have been higher for Europe and the Ottoman Empire. It's got everything.
It really does. And the whole thing kicks off with a massive crisis for Sultan Murad II. The sources you've got make it clear that 2 years before Varna, they were just devastating for the Ottomans. Major defeats, one after another. It led to this deep disappointment, and morale was, well, apparently terrible.
Okay, so let's break that down. This crisis, what did it actually look like on the ground?
Well, these losses weren't just, losing a battle here or there. They apparently caused serious arguments among the top commanders. And maybe even worse, a big economic hit. All that constant fighting, especially when they weren't winning and bringing back loot, it cost a fortune.
Right. So losing battles meant the money dried up.
Pretty much. The sources say the treasury was basically empty. They couldn't even pay the soldiers properly. And on top of that, their intelligence suggested the Crusaders were likely planning to come back, maybe even stronger, in the spring.
Wow, okay. Huge pressure on the Sultan then. And didn't he also have something really personal going on? A tragedy.
Yeah, a really big one. The sources make it clear that while Murad felt responsible for the military losses, he was also just shattered by losing his favorite son, Shahzadeh Alaeddin. He'd put so much into this son's education, had huge hopes for him. It even says Murad wanted to be buried right next to him. Shows how deep that grief went.
Oh man, that adds such a heavy human layer to all the political stress he was under.
It really does. And in that climate, his advisors, especially the Grand Vizier, Shanbarla Halil Pasha, a very powerful figure, they started pushing for peace. They were seriously worried that another Crusader attack, especially with fresh troops, could just wreck Ottoman control in Europe, in Rumeli.
And that's what led to the treaty with Hungary.
Eventually, yes. They signed a 10-year peace deal, the Peace of Segedin. And the crucial bit here, stressed in the sources, is that both rulers swore these incredibly solemn oaths on their holy books.
Okay.
Sultan Murad on the Quran, King Ladislaus of Hungary on the Bible. This was meant to be, a decade of actual peace.
But spoiler alert, it didn't exactly work out that way. And didn't the Sultan do something totally unexpected right after signing this big peace deal?
He did. Absolutely shocking. The sources say he basically took all the blame for the recent defeats. And then, in a move that was completely unheard of in Ottoman history, he told his pashas he was abdicating. Just stepping down, leaving the throne to his son, Mehmed, who was only 12.
12 years old? Wait, a 12-year-old Sultan? That must have sent shockwaves.
Total shock, like zero precedent for this. The sources say his top officials begged him not to do it, especially not then, but he wouldn't budge.
So he just left.
He went off to Manisa in western Anatolia with just a few loyal followers. Now, the young Mehmed was technically the Sultan and apparently quite bright, but the sources are pretty clear.
Yeah.
It was the Grand Vizier, Halil Pasha, who was really running the show day to day.
Okay. So you've got this kid Sultan who thinks he's ready, but really it's the powerful Grand Vizier calling the shots. Sounds like a recipe for instability.
And it was. Almost immediately, you start seeing disagreements pop up, especially between Halil Pasha and some of the guys closer to the young Sultan, like his tutor, Zanos Pasha, and this other commander, Segedin Pasha, who Mehmed had just promoted.
Right, internal tensions. And meanwhile, news of this crazy situation, the Sultan quitting, a kid taking over, it gets back to Europe really fast.
Oh yeah, lightning fast. And hearing that this formidable Sultan Murad, the guy they'd been fighting, had just walked away and left a 12-year-old in charge, well, you can imagine the reaction in Christian Europe.
Pure joy, I bet. They must have seen this as a massive opportunity.
Exactly, like the golden moment. Finally, a chance to push the Ottomans out of Europe for good, especially out of the Balkans. The talk immediately started in courts across Europe. How do we take advantage of this?
But hang on, wasn't King Ladislaus, the Hungarian king, stuck? He'd just sworn that oath on the Bible for the 10-year peace treaty.
That was the big sticking point for him, yeah. Initially, he was apparently really hesitant. Breaking a sacred oath, that's serious stuff, bad for your reputation, maybe even divine punishment, But the papacy, through Cardinal Cesarini and the Byzantine Empire, who hated the Segedin Treaty anyway, they saw their chance and pushed hard for war.
They actually encouraged him to break the treaty.
Relentlessly. Byzantine messengers went everywhere. France, the Pope, Hungary, basically saying, now is the time. Revenge for Nibelung. Let's go.
So how did they get a Christian king around breaking an oath sworn on the Bible? What was the justification?
Well, this is where the papal argument comes in, delivered by Cardinal Cesarini. Essentially, the argument was, an oath made without the Pope's okay, especially an oath made with Muslims. Well, it wasn't really binding. The Pope could absolve him.
Wow, that's convenient.
Yeah.
Theological way out. So what happened in the Hungarian council when they debated this? Must have been intense.
Oh, definitely. Long, apparently very heated arguments. And interestingly, John Hunyadi, the famous general, he was initially against breaking the peace because of the oath.
But he changed his mind, the great Hunyadi.
He did, and the sources suggest a big reason was ambition. He was promised he'd be made king of Bulgaria if the crusade won. That seems to have tipped the balance for him.
Okay, so ambition wins out. But didn't he have some kind of condition, like a delay?
Yeah, pretty clever one, actually. Hunyadi insisted they hold off on declaring war until September. His thinking, maybe hoping the Ottomans would keep their word, or maybe just tactical, was that the Segedin Treaty said the Ottomans had to hand over all the Serbian castles by September 1st. He wanted to make sure those castles were actually back in Serbian hands before they officially broke the peace.
So wait and see if the Ottomans deliver, then attack. Did they agree to that?
They did. The condition was accepted, and just like that, the oath was broken. They swore a new oath, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Virgin Mary, the works committing to attack on September 1st.
Okay, the crusade is back on. Who signed up this time? Who was in this big alliance?
It was a pretty broad group, yeah. Sources list Hungary, Bohemia, Wallachia, Moldavia, Croatia, the Byzantine Empire, Poland, some German states, and of course the papacy was right behind it, providing support and legitimacy.
And Venice. I remember them being cautious.
Extremely cautious. Yeah, they didn't want another long, costly war with the Ottomans. So they played it smart, or maybe sneaky. They provided ships for the crossing, but flew papal or other flags, not Venetian ones, to look neutral. Their game was purely about potential land grabs, Thessaloniki, Gallipoli, Black Sea areas, if the crusade won.
And other smaller players jumped in, hoping for spoils too.
Yep. Ragusa, for example, hoped to snag Avlonia and Kanina, key ports down in Albania.
And the Byzantine emperor, he was nervous about fighting directly, but he still helped in a really disruptive way.
Yes, this is a really interesting point from the sources. He didn't commit big armies, probably scared of Ottoman revenge, but he did something major. He released Shahzad Orhan,
the Ottoman pretender, from Constantinople.
Exactly. Let him loose right into Rumeli, the Ottoman European territories. It was a deliberate move to try and stir up trouble from within, hoping Ottoman nobles might flock to him and start a civil war while the Crusaders attacked from outside.
Did that work? Did Orhan get much support?
Nope, not really. When nobody significant rallied to him, Orhan kind of panicked and fled towards Diliorman. The young Sultan Mehmed in Edirne reacted fast, sent Shahabetin Pasha after him. Orhan ended up trapped and had to sneak back to Constantinople by ship.
So that internal disruption plan failed.
Completely. The sources say Ottomans actually hated the idea of internal fighting while facing this huge external threat. Orhan was seen as helping the enemy, basically.
Okay, so while Europe's plotting and this pretender thing fizzles out, back in Serbia, did the Ottomans actually hand over those castles like the treaty said, even though the Crusaders had already decided to break it?
This is pretty remarkable, and the sources highlight it. Yes, they did. By September 1st, the Ottomans had pulled out of Serbia and handed over all the agreed-upon castles to the Serbian ruler, despot Ura Branković. They totally fulfilled their side of the bargain.
And Branković, who, importantly, did not join this new crusade, he then did something critical.
He did. Maybe grateful, maybe just pragmatic. Branković sent word to the Ottomans in Edirne. He specifically warned them about the massive Crusader army getting ready to attack.
So the Ottomans knew it was coming. But when the actual news hit that the Crusaders had crossed the Danube on September 22nd, what was the reaction in Edirne?
Absolute panic and indecision. The sources describe just sheer anxiety. This was the biggest Christian threat they'd faced in decades since Nibelung, and those recent defeats were fresh in everyone's mind. People feared this could actually be it, the end of the Ottomans in Europe. The Danube crossing just tipped them over the edge.
And this panic led to disagreements at the top about who should lead the army.
Exactly. You had one camp around young Sultan Mehmed saying he should lead, show strength, inspire the troops. But the other side, led by the very experienced Grand Vizier Halil Pasha, were adamant. They basically said, no way, only Sultan Murad's experience can save us now.
So Halil Pasha goes to the 12-year-old Sultan and says, "We need your dad back."
Pretty much. The sources say he pleaded with Mehmed, saying flat out, there's no way we can stop this enemy unless your father comes back. He told him the senior commanders all agreed and urged Mehmed to send for Murad to take command.
Wow. How did Mehmed react to that, being told to call back the father he just replaced?
Well, the sources record this incredibly sharp reply, almost like he's schooling the Grand Vizier. Mehmed apparently criticized them for not planning better, saying something like, shouldn't we have thought before acting? This mess is because of bad judgment. He pointed out that changing sultans wasn't a game. It's a really fascinating glimpse of his character.
That's amazing. A 12-year-old talking statecraft to his top advisor.
Right. It shows the kind of education he must have had. But despite the criticism, he respected his father and knew the danger was real. So he agreed. He'd invite his father back, but specifically as commander-in-chief for this crisis, not necessarily to take back the throne permanently, at least not initially.
Now, you mentioned there's some debate about whether he actually wrote that famous letter himself.
Yeah, some historians wonder if a kid could really write something that insightful, or if it was maybe polished up later to make Mehmed look good. But the key thing from your sources is that major Ottoman historians from near the time Ibn Kemal, Hoca Segedin, Solakzadeh, they all record this letter. So whether Mehmed dictated it or approved it, the order came from him, the Sultan.
Okay, so the call goes out. How did Murad, chilling in retirement in Manisa, react the first time?
Initially, not interested. The sources say his reply was basically, you've got your Sultan, go fight. He'd made his decision, he was done.
So Mehmed had to send another message, a stronger one.
Exactly. And the second letter was apparently a masterpiece of persuasive logic. It basically said, look, if you're still the Sultan, it's your religious duty to come defend your lands. If I'm the Sultan, then you have to obey my command. Either way, you need to get here now. No delays.
Huh. That covers all the bases. Did that work?
Instantly. That second letter, framing it as unavoidable duty, hit the mark. Sultan Murad immediately ordered the Anatolian army to assemble. He was coming back.
Okay, so Murad's mobilizing fast in Anatolia. Meanwhile, the Crusaders under Hunyadi are marching through the Balkans. What was their plan?
Their initial idea was to move pretty quickly along the Danube. They actually left their heavy siege gear behind at Orova, just took light cannons, thinking the Balkan mountains would be too tough with heavy stuff as winter neared. They marched towards Vidin, then aimed for Nizbalu.
And Murad's response was quick, even coming from Anatolia.
Incredibly quick. He pulled together maybe close to 40,000 Anatolian troops and started a forced march from Manisa. Now, the direct route was across the Dardanelles, the Senecal Strait, but that was a problem.
Right, blocked by the Crusader fleet.
Exactly. Sources confirm the Allied fleet was sitting there waiting. So Murad had to make a fast decision. Forget the Dardanelles, divert the whole army north, towards Istanbul, towards the Bosphorus Strait.
A massive detour. Did he manage to get them across the Bosphorus without the Crusaders noticing?
It seems so. The march was rapid. Manisa, Balıkesir, Bursa, across the Mans, hitting the Bosphorus near Janissary fortress. And yeah, the Crusader fleet waiting down at the Dardanelles apparently completely missed this huge army moving north.
And didn't Halil Pasha, back in Rumeli, help secure the crossing point?
He did. Even from Edirne, he made sure cannons were set up on the European side of the Bosphorus, ready to provide covering fire and control the strait.
How did tens of thousands of soldiers actually get across that water?
Mainly using Genoese ships from their colony right across from Constantinople.
Yeah.
And get this detail from the sources. The Genoese charged 1 gold ducat per soldier for the ride.
A gold ducat each. Wow, talk about wartime profiteering.
Yeah.
But they paid it. Did anyone try to stop the crossing?
Oh yeah. The Byzantine emperor heard Murad was crossing and sent his own ships out to try and block them. But the Ottoman artillery commander, Saruka Pasha, was waiting on the shore. As the Byzantine ships got close, the Ottoman cannons opened up. They sank some, damaged others, and the rest apparently turned tail and ran back to Constantinople harbor pretty fast.
So the crossing worked. When did Murad actually land in Europe with his army?
He hit Rumeli around October 20th, 1444. Then it was a quick march to Edirne. Murad himself actually camped outside the city, keeping up the appearance of just being the commander, not the Sultan again yet, but he got a huge welcome. And the Rumeli army, waiting there, joined his forces.
How did they figure out where the Crusaders actually were at this point?
They got lucky, captured a few Crusader soldiers near Niblu and interrogated them. That confirmed the main enemy force was operating around that area.
Okay, so what was the first Ottoman plan based on that intel?
They assumed the Crusaders would keep pushing west, maybe towards Ternova or even Edirne itself. So the initial plan was for Murad to take the combined army through the Balkan passes Filibe, Shupka, Ternova route and intercept them. Sultan Mehmed and Halil Pasha stayed back in Edirne.
But the Crusaders changed their plan, didn't they? Why did they go for Ternova?
Right, they switched tracks. The sources suggest a few reasons. Winter was setting in, those mountain passes were notoriously difficult, plus finding enough food and supplies in that area would be tough. They worried about getting stuck. So they picked a new target, Varna.
Varna? On the coast. Why there?
Mostly logistics and strategy. Being on the Black Sea coast meant they could get supplies easily from their fleet. No more worrying about mountain supply lines. The bigger picture, maybe, was take Varna, link up with the Byzantines further down the coast, maybe even arrange a royal marriage for King Ladislaus in Constantinople, and then march on Edirne from the east.
Okay, makes sense. And this coastal march is when the Wallachian leader, Vlad II, joins them.
Yeah, Vlad Dracula's father showed up near Nizibulu with about 10,000 cavalry, but apparently the meeting didn't go smoothly. Sources say Vlad strongly warned King Ladislaus not to break the oath, saying it would bring bad luck, maybe even pointing to a recent earthquake in Hungary as a bad omen. He also supposedly made fun of the Crusader army size, saying Murad took more men just to go hunting.
Ouch. That probably didn't go over well with Hunyadi and Ladislaus.
Not at all. Hunyadi apparently blew up, accused Vlad of being a coward or worse. Vlad got angry, drew his sword, things got tense. Hunyadi's men actually arrested him.
Arrested their own ally.
Briefly, Vlad apparently talked his way out by promising a bunch of gold and another 4,000 soldier, but then after being released, he made some excuse, left his son Mircea in charge of the Wallachian troops, and went back home himself.
Okay, so 4,000 Wallachians ended up joining. Now, the sources mentioned some pretty brutal stuff happened during this Crusader march.
Yeah, sadly, the sources are quite graphic. Despite being a holy war, they describe the Crusaders committing terrible massacres against both Muslim and Christian villages along the way. Burning towns, castles, even churches, Bulgarian and Greek ones too, not just mosques. Just widespread destruction and cruelty, seemingly unchecked by the commanders.
That's grim. They took Yenipazar next.
Yep, October 24th, another massacre there. Then Ladislaus sent threats to nearby towns Shumnu, Varna itself, surrender or face slaughter.
Did they surrender?
Nope. They refused. So the Crusaders besieged Shumnur and took it, but apparently with heavy Turkish losses. One source says 5,000 defenders killed. There was also a small clash near Ternova where a Crusader scouting party bumped into some Ottomans, took losses, but it confirmed the Ottomans were close. Then they took Pravati more massacres before finally heading for Varna.
So after all that, they finally reached Varna. When did the siege start?
They got there and started besieging the city on November 3rd, 1444. As soon as Murad heard this, he pushed his army hard towards Varna to force a battle.
And the two armies end up facing each other near the city on the night of November 9th.
That's right. That night, the Ottomans arrived in force and took up their positions. The showdown was finally here.
Okay, let's picture the battlefield. What was the ground like around Varna?
The sources give a good description. Varna itself was walled, well defended. South and west, you had this big lake, Divina Lake, connected to the sea by marshy channels, really swampy. North, steep forested hills, maybe 350 meters high, tough terrain. So basically, the only easy ways onto the plain in front of the city were from the northeast and northwest. The whole setup, lake, marsh, mountains, city, is described like a bag.
A bag. And the Crusaders had marched right into it.
Exactly. They were down on the plain, inside the bag, with Varna at their backs. And then the Ottoman army arrives and basically seals off the open end, the mouth of the bag. They were trapped.
When the Crusaders saw all those Ottoman campfires suddenly appear that night, how did they react?
Surprise, definitely. And fear. They clearly hadn't expected Murad to get there so fast after crossing the Bosphorus. They spent all night getting ready for battle.
And Sultan Murad?
He was ready faster. And the sources make it clear. His goal wasn't just to win, it was annihilation. Wipe out the Crusader army completely.
So the Ottomans set up on battle morning. How did they line up?
In this big crescent or bow shape, stretching between some hills facing the Crusaders. On the Ottoman right wing, you had the Rumeli sipahis cavalry from the European provinces under her Kapitan Pasha. On the left wing, the Anatolian sipahis cavalry from Asia Minor led by Karaka Pasha. Hidden behind the left, up on the slopes, were the Azebs, light infantry, and the Akanchas, the raiders, ready for flanking. And right in the center, near hills called Sunkak-Tepe and Murat-Tepe, that was Sultan Murad's command post. The elite Janissaries, maybe some sipahis too, formed up in this deep, solid block, like a castle formation. Really hard to break.
And wasn't there that really dramatic detail right there with the Sultan?
Yeah, totally deliberate and symbolic. A spear stuck in the ground and hanging from it. The actual broken piece of Segedin Treaty. The oath Ladislaus broke. And next to it, another empty spear.
Wow. Just putting right out there. A physical accusation on the battlefield. What about Ottoman numbers? Any solid estimate?
Well, numbers in old sources are always tricky, ranging from like 40,000 up to crazy figures like 125,000. But based on Murad's crossing force plus the Rumeli troops and Janissaries, the sources you shared suggest somewhere around 60,000 is probably realistic.
Okay, 60,000. How did King Ladislaus react when he saw the full Ottoman force deployed at dawn?
Alarm bells ringing, for sure. He hadn't expected them so quick or so numerous. He immediately beefed up his outposts, told everyone to stay in armor, ready to go all night. And the sources stressed this. There was no retreat possible. They were trapped. Their only option was to smash through the Ottoman line.
How did Hunyadi arrange the Crusader army that morning, November 10th?
He set them up in this long single line, about 3 kilometers wide, maybe 750 meters out from Varna's walls. The left flank rested on Lake Divina and the marshes, the right flank up against the hills. The right wing had 5 big battalions, guys like the bishops of Bosnia and Urlo, Cardinal Cesarini were there. They were angled back slightly, echeloned to protect the flank. Behind them, a fortified camp, held mostly by Poles. Hunyadi put a lot of strength there, expecting an Ottoman flank attack. Center was King Ladislaus himself, with his own units, surrounded by his best cavalry. The left wing, also 5 battalions, was solid against the lake, and the Wallachians were in reserve behind the center, with their own camp and some light cannons.
And Hunyadi wasn't just sitting in one spot.
No, sources say he planned to be mobile, ride around, direct things where needed, not just command from the center like Murad.
And the Crusader gear, top notch.
Oh yeah. Except for the Wallachians, pretty much everyone was in full-plate armor, heavy cavalry, heavy infantry, armed with those big, nasty double-edged swords. And based on recent studies mentioned in your sources, the Crusader army was big, definitely no less than 70,000.
Okay, so 2 huge, well-equipped armies ready to go. What did the commanders do right before the battle kicked off? Any final words?
Sultan Murad apparently spent a long time praying the night before, asking for victory or martyrdom. In the morning, he gathered his commanders, gave this really powerful speech about, the duty of jihad, the honor of dying for the faith, fighting bravely. He basically said, look, death comes for everyone, so let's make it count today. Win as Ghazis or die as martyrs. Really fired them up. King Ladislaus also spoke to his commanders. His big message was, focus on destruction. No stopping to loot if the Turks run. Chase them down, finish them off. He used this phrase, first kill the bee, then eat the honey. He told them stay disciplined, don't break ranks, and if they routed the Turks, nothing could stop them.
Intense stuff. Okay, the scene is absolutely set. When did the fighting actually start?
Early morning, November 10th. The Ottomans kicked it off.
What was their first move?
Murad sent his left wing forward, first the light troops, the Azebs and Akinchas, maybe 10,000-15,000 of them. They came down from the hills trying to outflank the Crusader right. Took them till about noon to reach the Crusader lines. The ground was a bit tricky for the heavy Crusader knights. The Ottoman archers fired tons of arrows, but against full plate armor, didn't do much damage. So the Az and Kanyunshas charged in, trying to disrupt the Crusader formation.
How did the Crusaders on that side handle these lighter troops?
Hunyadi was right there expecting this. He led a heavy cavalry charge, Bishop of Urlo's guys, others joined in right into the Ottoman light troops, and that heavy armor, close formation, it just smashed through the lightly armed Azems and Akinchas, pushed them back up the slopes with heavy losses. Pretty soon that whole Ottoman flanking force was routing.
Okay, so initial Ottoman attack on their left fails. What about the other side, the Ottoman right wing?
They attacked the Crusader left wing down by the lake. The Rumeli sipahis charged. The Crusaders waited, then countercharged hard. And initially, they pushed the Rumeli sipahis back quite a bit.
Did they break too?
Not right away.
Ah.
Şefethen Pasha brought up reserves, they regrouped, counterattacked again, and this time they pushed the Crusader left back. Seeing that flank struggling, Hunyadi pulled troops from the center reserve, even some of the king's own guys, and rushed over to shore up the Crusader left.
So Hunyadi's running around plugging gaps. Back on the Ottoman left, where the Azebs had routed, did they get any help?
Yeah, Karaka Pasha saw his light troops collapsing, so he sent in his main force, the Anatolian sipahis. They charged hard into the Crusader right, which was maybe a bit disorganized after chasing the Azebs. And this charge worked. They broke through the Crusader line, especially hitting the Croatian units hard, causing them to fall back. Now, some other Crusader units managed to rally and stop the retreat, even counterattacked briefly, but it didn't last. They ended up retreating back towards their own camp behind the lines. Sources say, 4 Crusader battalions on that wing were basically knocked out of the fight.
Okay, so the Anatolian sipahis are breaking through on one side, but Hunyadi's intervention on the other side, against the Ottoman right wing, was successful.
Hunyadi's charge there eventually broke the Rumeli sipahis. They started to rout under his pressure.
And the Anatolian sipahis, who'd broken through the Crusader right.
They kept going. They actually reached and overran the fortified Crusader camp behind that wing, captured it.
Okay, this is getting chaotic. Ottoman right is routing, but Ottoman left has broken through and taken the enemy camp. What did Hunyadi do then?
After routing the Ottoman right, he immediately swung back towards his own right flank, where the Anatolians were in his camp. He grabbed more reinforcements from King Ladislaus in the center and launched a massive counterattack right into the camp against the Anatolian sipahis. This sudden attack caused panic. Maybe they were busy looting, I don't know. Plus, some Crusader units that had fled earlier came back when they saw the fighting in the camp. This combined push was devastating. It completely routed the Ottoman left wing, the Anatolians. Their commander, Karaka Pasha, was killed in the chaos.
Wow. So after all that back and forth, suddenly both Ottoman wings are basically broken or routing?
Yeah.
Hunyadi must have thought he'd won.
Absolutely. That's exactly how it looked. Both enemy wings collapsing. Hunyadi started reorganizing, sending troops back to the center, and he gave King Ladislaus strict orders. Do not move. Stay put, no matter what.
And lots of fleeing Ottoman soldiers must have been spreading panic by now.
Oh yeah. Sources mention streams of them running off. Back in Edirne, Sultan Mehmed and Halil Pasha got these first reports. We're routed, it's over, causing total panic. People apparently started packing up, thinking the empire was finished.
So the capital thought it was lost.
Based on those early reports, yes. And this is the absolute key turning point, the battle was not over.
What was Sultan Murad doing in the center all this time, while his wings were falling apart?
He was holding firm. With his Janissaries, in that solid castle formation, he sent out some reserves to try and rally the wings. The Rumeli sipahis on the right did manage to regroup a bit with Şehebettin Pasha and kept fighting Hunyadi for a while longer.
But the Anatolian wing, the left.
They were done. Their commander, Karaka Pasha, was dead. They were leaderless. They just broke and fled the field completely.
And Hunyadi was still pressing the Rumeli guys hard.
He was, and even though they rallied briefly, they were starting to break again under his attack.
Okay, this feels like the absolute peak. From the Crusader side, especially King Ladislaus, watching from the center, it must have looked like total victory was seconds away.
Exactly. Both Ottoman wings shattered or fleeing. The field looked clear.
And this is where King Ladislaus makes that fatal mistake. The worst decision ever.
Precisely. Seeing the Ottomans seemingly collapsing, maybe wanting the glory for himself instead of Hunyadi getting it all, Ladislaus ignored Hunyadi's desperate order to stay put. He decided he would deliver the killing blow. He gathered his knights and charged straight for Sultan Murad in the center.
He must have thought Murad's position, just the Janissaries left, was weak.
Probably. There were only maybe 4,000 or 5,000 Janissaries and guards there. Ladislaus likely thought his heavy cavalry could just punch right through them easily.
But Sultan Murad didn't panic, even with his army melting away around him.
Not one bit. Incredible composure. Seeing Ladislaus charging, Murad gave an order. The Janissaries coolly, deliberately pulled back slightly, opening up a gap right in front of the Sultan. Ladislaus saw them moving back and thought, aha, they're running too. He charged right into the gap. Big mistake. As the sources say, his worst decision ever.
It was a trap.
A deadly one. The Janissaries executed it perfectly. As soon as Ladislaus and his knights were inside the gap, the Janissary ranks slammed shut behind and around them, surrounded, before they even knew what hit them. Ladislaus apparently even shouted at Murad on the hill, "Don't run, Murad!" not realizing he was the one caught.
And the Janissaries closed in.
And just cut them down. Swift, brutal, knights falling left and right. The sources talk about Janissary swords and axes flashing. Just pure annihilation in minutes.
And King Ladislaus himself.
How did he die?
His horse got cut down, probably by an axe. He fought on foot for a moment. Then a Janissary named Koka Hazir took his head off with one blow.
His head. Wait, this goes back to that spear you mentioned. Yes. directly. The king's severed head was taken straight to Sultan Murad, and then placed on that second spear right next to the one holding the broken peace treaty.
Oh my God. The head of the king who broke the oath put right next to the proof of the broken oath. That's horrifyingly effective symbolism.
Unbelievably powerful. The sources say it was basically unprecedented, a stark lesson. And seeing their king's head on that spear just utterly destroyed Crusader morale. Any hope they had left vanished instantly.
What about Hunyadi? He was coming back from his success on the flank.
Yeah, he was apparently looking around frantically for the king. When he saw the head on the spear, he tried desperately to rally his men. Fight! We have to get the king's head back.
But it was too late. The shock was too great.
Way too great. The terror of seeing the king dead, displayed like that. Hunyadi couldn't get them to fight. It was over. The battle was lost.
So Hunyadi and what was left of the Crusader army just ran.
Yep. Total rout. Seeing their king dead like that, they fled in terror. The Ottomans quickly reorganized and pursued them relentlessly. Hunyadi himself managed to get away, maybe with about 4,000 men, escaping via the northeast road.
Any last pockets of resistance?
Just a few crusaders held out briefly in one of the fortified camps with some light guns, but the Turks overran them quickly. Many other big names died too, Cardinal Cesarini among them, killed in the chaos.
And the Ottomans captured much loot.
Yeah, they got the Crusader baggage train, 250 carts full of stuff the Crusaders couldn't escape with.
Sounds like a truly bloody battle, though. Huge losses on both sides, even for the victors.
Absolutely devastating. Very few Crusaders survived apart from Hunyadi's escapees. Ottoman losses were also really high, sources say over 15,000 killed, and that's not counting the guys who fled earlier.
And there was that story about Murad walking the battlefield afterwards.
Yeah, quite poignant. Looking at all the dead Crusaders, Murad reportedly noticed how young they all were. He apparently said something like, "Isn't it strange, not a single old man among them?"
And one of his commanders had a dry response.
Yep. Supposedly replied, "Old men are cautious, Sultan. They don't get involved in foolish adventures like this." A pretty bleak summary of the whole thing.
And back in Edirne, the panic turned to celebration.
Oh yeah. The terror from those early reports was completely replaced by massive joy the next day when the real news arrived. Sultan Murad sent out victory messages everywhere. The crusade was decisively crushed.
So, stepping back, what's the big takeaway? What did Varna really mean?
Huge significance. First, for the Ottomans, it totally wiped away the shame and the crisis from those previous defeats. Huge morale boost. But more importantly, for Europe, that whole Crusader dream, the idea of uniting to kick the Ottomans out of the Balkans, Varna completely shattered it. It proved the Ottomans were there to stay and couldn't just be pushed out by another crusade.
So it really cemented Ottoman power in the Balkans for the long haul.
Absolutely. For centuries, Varna showed they weren't just passing through, they were a permanent major power in southeastern Europe.
It's amazing, looking back to the sources you brought us, how we could follow this whole incredible chain of events. The Sultan's abdication, the broken treaty, the Pope's loophole, building the crusade, that frantic Bosphorus crossing, the battlefield trap, and then that single charge, changing everything.
Right. It really gives you a shortcut to understanding just how complex this moment was. The politics, the religion, the strategy, the personalities, the sheer chance involved, all those factors colliding at Varna.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How different could history have been if King Ladislaus hadn't made that one impulsive charge?
Exactly. Or maybe the lesson is just about war itself, how unpredictable it is, how huge armies and grand plans can sometimes hinge on one single split-second, maybe foolish decision.